Thank you for joining us for WBUC's annual Budget Informational Show. I'm Alex Haessig. I'm joined by the Superintendent of the Oswego City School District, Dr. Dean Goewey. This year's budget is one of the tougher ones our district has faced. Dr. Goewey and myself will take you through the proposed budget and help explain the process of how it all works in advance of the budget vote on May 17th. First off, thank you for joining us today, Dr. Goewey.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, first question, could you take us through the budget and explain why the certain cuts that were made were made?
It kind of rolls back to the very early winter, and we start looking at the budget. We knew the budget was going to be particularly challenging this year for a variety of reasons that we can talk about. We start working with different departments, principals. We take a look at our revenues because we wanted to build a revenue-based budget. And a revenue-based budget is one that's based on the monies that are coming into the district only, with zero use of reserves or fund balance. In fact, the result of that this year is that we have a budget that's based on the actual money coming in, $79.5 million, which is actually smaller than our current budget and actually smaller than last year's budget, which is highly unusual for a school district to take a step back, but we think it's the responsible thing to do. Unfortunately, in the process there, we discovered that we had about a $5.6 million budget gap, meaning we had less money by $5.6 million than we had for the current budget, and that gap had to be filled through the reduction of programs and staff.
Now,
so that's challenging.
How did the Oswego City School District end up $5.6 million in the hole?
Okay, a couple things contributed to that. Compared to this year's budget, next year's budget right out of the gate is $5 million in the hole, because last year the board used $3 million that we had in reserves that we no longer can use. There's $3 million. Additionally, the reduction in the pilot agreement with 9 Mile 1 and 2 was $2 million less for next year than this year. There's 5 of the 5.6, and the other 0.6 comes from increased costs.
Now, not related to this, but how important is state aid in the overall assessment of the budget?
It's really important, particularly for Oswego, because as the largest district in the county, we still get the third smallest state aid. And the state aid formula for small city schools is not helpful to us. We get around $22 million in state aid. Fulton and Central Square, the next two large school districts in our county, get $55 and $56 million in state aid. So you can see the reducing pilot, the loss of fund balance and reserves, and the unfairness of state aid has created this problem.
Now, obviously this year, a lot of hard choices. How are those areas that we have to cut back on? How is that process of the decision making made?
It's made by a group of leaders, principals, department heads, union heads, who work together for many months trying to come up with fair and equitable reductions in programs and in staff. We're reducing this year's budget by 4.2%. However, we're making significantly greater reductions, in particular to athletics, only because we had such a robust athletic offering pop already that was the logical go-to. There's a lot of talk about the reductions in athletics, but what people are forgetting or not referencing is that we also are cutting 52 positions.
Yeah.
And that's very, very painful. And those positions come across our district. 8 elementary teachers, a whole host of teachers at the middle school, a greater number at the high school, programs, athletics, clubs, stipends. But we really should be most concerned about lost jobs.
And the thing that, like you alluded to, the athletics being cut, that's the big headline you see.
Yeah.
What happens if that causes the budget to be voted down on May 17th?
Good question. We understand that athletics are a very emotional topic for families and students, and they are for us as well. There's no one that will come to a board meeting and address the board with a concern about the reduction of athletics, because the board and I have tormented over this. No one will come to the microphone and say anything that we don't disagree with. We agree it's painful. We hate to cut athletics. We hate to cut jobs. We hate to eliminate programs, but the painful reality is the community is really only voting on the tax levy. it's an opportunity for them to share their voice about their feelings about the budget. But the law says that if the budget goes down, we have to go to this year's tax levy, which would mean that 2.5% levy increase we're asking for, which is $704,000. We have to go back to this year's levy, which means another $704,000 in cuts. So those that might go to the polls and try to express their concern about the loss of a particular sport by voting no are really making the situation worse.
And would you say that's the greatest misconception in the community?
I really do. And you hear the buzz in the community. I'm just going to vote no if they're going to cut hockey, or I'm going to vote no if the wrestling team is cut. And because they think then that we're going to roll back to this year's budget and everything will be okay. And really, it's quite the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Now, lastly, we've seen on the Oswego City School District website there are new polling locations for this year. Could you just tell us what those new locations are and why the change was made?
Yeah, for decades now, we've had 10 polling places in Oswego. There are 7 wards in the Oswego City, and each of those had a polling place. We also had one in Scriba, Oswego Town, and Minetta, which are the towns that are in our district. We're moving to 4, and it's not similar to what other districts around us, Fulton, Central Square. Larger districts are reducing the number of polling places. We have Elam Grace Church, St. Paul's, Oswego Town Hall, and Scriba Fire Station.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today and providing us with more insight behind the process.
Thank you.
Make sure to get out and vote on May 17th, and that's all for us.